Section 9 of the Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals by Charles Darwin. Chapter 5, Special Expressions of Animals, Part 1. The Dog. I have already described the appearance of a dog approaching another dog with hostile intentions, namely, with erected ears, eyes intently directed forwards, hair on the neck and back bristling, gait remarkably stiff, with the tail upright and rigid. So familiar is this appearance to us that an angry man is sometimes said to, quote, have his back up, unquote. Of the above points, the stiff gait and upright tail alone require further discussion. Sir C. Bell remarks that when a tiger or wolf is struck by its keeper and is suddenly roused to ferocity, every muscle is in tension, and the limbs are in an attitude of strained exertion, prepared to spring. This tension of the muscles and consequent stiff gait may be accounted for on the principle of associated habit, for anger has continually led to fierce struggles, and consequently to all the muscles of the body having been violently exerted. There is also reason to suspect that the muscular system requires some short preparation, or some degree of innervation, before being brought into strong action. My own sensations lead me to this inference, but I cannot discover that it is a conclusion admitted by physiologists. Sir J. Paget, however, informs me that when muscles are suddenly contracted with the greatest force without any preparation, they are liable to be ruptured, as when a man slips unexpectedly, but that this rarely occurs when an action, however violent, is deliberately performed. With respect to the upright position of the tail, it seems to depend, but whether this is really the case I know not, on the elevator muscles being more powerful than the depressors, so that when all the muscles of the hinder part of the body are in a state of tension, the tail is raised. A dog in cheerful spirits and trotting before his master with high elastic steps generally carries his tail aloft, though it is not held nearly so stiffly as when he is angered. A horse, when first turned out into an open field, may be seen to trot along with elastic strides, the head and tail being held high aloft. Even cows, when they frisk about from pleasure, throw up their tails in a ridiculous fashion. So it is with various animals in the zoological gardens. The position of the tail, however, in certain cases, is determined by special circumstances. Thus, as soon as a horse breaks into a gallop at full speed, he always lowers his tail, so that as little resistance as possible may be offered to the air. When a dog is on the point of springing on his antagonist, he utters a savage growl. The ears are pressed closely backwards, and the upper lip is retracted out of the way of his teeth, especially of his canines. These movements may be observed with dogs and puppies in their play. But if a dog gets really savage in his play, his expression immediately changes. This, however, is simply due to the lips and ears being drawn back with much greater energy. If a dog only snarls at another, the lip is generally retracted on one side alone, namely towards his enemy. The movements of a dog whilst exhibiting affection towards his master were described in our second chapter. These consist in the head and whole body being lowered and thrown into flexuous movements, with the tail extended and wagged from side to side. The ears fall down and are drawn somewhat backwards, which causes the eyelids to be elongated and alters the whole appearance of the face. The lips hang loosely, and the hair remains smooth. All these movements or gestures are explicable, as I believe, from their standing in complete antithesis to those naturally assumed by a savage dog under a directly opposite state of mind. When a man merely speaks to, or just notices, his dog, we see the last vestige of these movements in a slight wag of the tail without any other movement of the body, and without even the ears being lowered. Dogs always exhibit their affection by desiring to rub against their masters, and to be rubbed or patted by them. Gratiolet explains the above gestures of affection in the following manner, and the reader can judge whether the explanation appears satisfactory. Speaking of animals in general, including the dog, he says, quote, C'est toujours la partie la plus sensible de leur corps qui recherche les caresses ou les dents. Lorsque toute la longueur des flancs et du corps est sensible, l'animal serpente et rampe sous les caresses, et ses ondulations se propagent le long des muscles analogues des segments jusqu'aux extrémités de la colonne vertébrale. Le queue se plie et s'agite. Unquote. Further on he adds that dogs, when feeling affectionate, lower their ears in order to exclude all sounds, so that their whole attention may be concentrated on the caresses of their master. Dogs have another and striking way of exhibiting their affection, namely, by licking the hands or faces of their masters. They sometimes lick other dogs, and then it is always their chops. I have also seen dogs licking cats with whom they were friends. This habit probably originated in the females carefully licking their puppies, the dearest object of their love, for the sake of cleansing them. They also often give their puppies, after a short absence, a few cursory licks, apparently from affection. Thus the habit will have become associated with the emotion of love, however it may afterwards be aroused. It is now so firmly inherited or innate that it is transmitted equally to both sexes. A female terrier of mine lately had her puppies destroyed, and though at all times a very affectionate creature, I was much struck with the manner in which she then tried to satisfy her instinctive maternal love by expending it on me, and her desire to lick my hands rose to an insatiable passion. The same principle probably explains why dogs, when feeling affectionate, like rubbing against their masters or being rubbed or patted by them, for from the nursing of their puppies, contact with a beloved object has become firmly associated in their minds with the emotion of love. The feeling of affection of a dog towards his master is combined with a strong sense of submission, which is akin to fear. Hence dogs not only lower their bodies and crouch a little as they approach their masters, but sometimes throw themselves on the ground with their bellies upwards. This is a movement as completely opposite as is possible to any show of resistance. I formerly possessed a large dog who was not at all afraid to fight with other dogs, but a wolf-like shepherd dog in the neighborhood, though not ferocious, and not so powerful as my dog, had a strange influence over him. When they met on the road, my dog used to run to meet him, with his tail partly tucked in between his legs and hair not erected, and then he would throw himself on the ground, belly upwards. By this action he seemed to say more plainly than by words, "Behold, I am your slave." A pleasurable and excited state of mind, associated with affection, is exhibited by some dogs in a very peculiar manner, namely by grinning. This was noticed long ago by Somerville, who says, "And with a courtly grin the fawning bounds salutes thee cowering. His wide opening nose upward he curls, and his large slow back eyes melt in soft blandishments and humble joy." The Chase, Book 1. Sir W. Scott's famous Scotch greyhound, Maida, had this habit, and it is common with terriers. I have also seen it in a Spitz and in a sheepdog. Mr. Riviere, who has particularly attended to this expression, informs me that it is rarely displayed in a perfect manner, but is quite common in a lesser degree. The upper lip during the act of grinning is retracted, as in snarling, so that the canines are exposed, and the ears are drawn backwards, but the general appearance of the animal clearly shows that anger is not felt. Sir C. Bell remarks, quote, "Dogs, in their expression of fondness, have a slight eversion of the lips, and grin and sniff amidst their gambols in a way that resembles laughter." Unquote. Some persons speak of the grin as a smile, but if it had been really a smile, we should see a similar though more pronounced movement of the lips and ears when the dogs utter their bark of joy. But this is not the case, although a bark of joy often follows a grin. On the other hand, dogs, when playing with their comrades or masters, almost always pretend to bite each other, and they then retract, though not energetically, their lips and ears. Hence I suspect that there is a tendency in some dogs, whenever they feel lively pleasure combined with affection, to act through habit and association on the same muscles, as in playfully biting each other or their master's hands. I have described in the second chapter the gait and appearance of a dog when cheerful, and the marked antithesis presented by the same animal when dejected and disappointed, with his head, ears, body, tail, and chops drooping, and eyes dull. Under the expectation of any great pleasure, dogs bound and jump about in an extravagant manner, and bark for joy. The tendency to bark under this state of mind is inherited, or runs in the breed. Greyhounds rarely bark, whilst the Spitz dog barks so incessantly on starting for a walk with his master that he becomes a nuisance. An agony of pain is expressed by dogs in nearly the same way as by many other animals, namely, by howling, writhing, and contortions of the whole body. Attention is shown by the head being raised, with the ears erected, and the eyes intently directed toward the object or quarter under observation. If it be a sound and the source is not known, the head is often turned obliquely from side to side in a most significant manner, apparently in order to judge with more exactness from what point the sound proceeds. But I have seen a dog greatly surprised at a new noise, turning his head to one side through habit, though he clearly perceived the source of the noise. Dogs, as formerly remarked, when their attention is in any way aroused, whilst watching some object or attending to some sound, often lift up one paw, and keep it doubled up, as if to make a slow and stealthy approach. A dog under extreme terror will throw himself down, howl, and void his excretions, but the hair, I believe, does not become erect unless some anger is felt. I have seen a dog much terrified at a band of musicians who were playing loudly outside the house, with every muscle of his body trembling, with his heart palpitating so quickly that the beats could hardly be counted, and panting for breath with widely open mouth, in the same manner as a terrified man does. Yet this dog had not exerted himself. He had only wandered slowly and restlessly about the room, and the day was cold. Even a very slight degree of fear is invariably shown by the tail being tucked in between the legs. This tucking in of the tail is accompanied by the ears being drawn backwards, but they are not pressed closely to the head as in snarling, and they are not lowered as when a dog is pleased or affectionate. When two young dogs chase each other in play, the one that runs away always keeps his tail tucked inwards. So it is when a dog, in the highest spirits, careers like a mad creature round and round his master in circles or in figures of 8. He then acts as if another dog were chasing him. This curious kind of play, which must be familiar to everyone who has attended to dogs, is particularly apt to be excited after the animal has been a little startled or frightened, as by his master suddenly jumping out on him in the dusk. In this case, as well as when two young dogs are chasing each other in play, it appears as if the one that runs away was afraid of the other catching him by the tail. But as far as I can find out, dogs very rarely catch each other in this manner. I asked a gentleman who had kept foxhounds all his life, and be applied to other experienced sportsmen, whether they had ever seen hounds thus seize a fox. But they never had. It appears that when a dog is chased, or when in danger of being struck behind, or of anything falling on him, in all these cases he wishes to withdraw as quickly as possible his whole hindquarters, and that from some sympathy or connection between the muscles, the tail is then drawn closely inwards. A similarly connected movement between the hindquarters and the tail may be observed in the hyena. Mr. Bartlett informs me that when two of these animals fight together, they are mutually conscious of the wonderful power of each other's jaws, and are extremely cautious. They well know that if one of their legs were seized, the bone would instantly be crushed into atoms. Hence they approach each other kneeling, with their legs turned as much as possible inwards, and with their whole bodies bowed so as not to present any salient point, the tail at the same time being closely tucked in between the legs. In this attitude they approach each other sideways, or even partly backwards. So again with deer, several of the species, when savage and fighting, tuck in their tails. When one horse in a field tries to bite the hindquarters of another in play, or when a rough boy strikes a donkey from behind, the hindquarters and the tail are drawn in, though it does not appear as if this were done merely to save the tail from being injured. We have also seen the reverse of these movements, for when an animal trots with high elastic steps, the tail is almost always carried aloft. As I have said, when a dog is chased and runs away, he keeps his ears directed backwards, but still open, and this is clearly done for the sake of hearing the footsteps of his pursuer. From habit, the ears are often held in the same position, and the tail tucked in, when the danger is obviously in front. I have repeatedly noticed, with a timid terrier of mine, that when she is afraid of some object in front, the nature of which she perfectly knows and does not need to reconnoitre, yet she will for a long time hold her ears and tail in this position, looking the image of discomfort. Discomfort, without any fear, is similarly expressed. Thus, one day I went out of doors, just at the time when this same dog knew that her dinner would be brought. I did not call her, but she wished much to accompany me, and at the same time she wished much for her dinner, and there she stood, first looking one way and then the other, with her tail tucked in and ears drawn back, presenting an unmistakable appearance of perplexed discomfort. Almost all the expressive movements now described, with the exception of the grinning from joy, are innate or instinctive, for they are common to all the individuals, young and old, of all the breeds. Most of them are likewise common to the aboriginal parents of the dog, namely the wolf and jackal, and some of them to other species of the same group. Tamed wolves and jackals, when caressed by their masters, jump about for joy, wag their tails, lower their ears, lick their masters' hands, crouch down, and even throw themselves on the ground belly upwards. I have seen a rather fox-like African jackal from the Gaboon depress its ears when caressed. Wolves and jackals, when frightened, certainly tuck in their tails, and a tame jackal has been described as careering round his master in circles and figures of 8, like a dog, with his tail between his legs. It has been stated that foxes, however tame, never display any of the above expressive movements, but this is not strictly accurate. Many years ago I observed in the Zoological Gardens, and recorded the fact at the time, that a very tame English fox, when caressed by the keeper, wagged its tail, depressed its ears, and then threw itself on the ground belly upwards. The black fox of North America likewise depressed its ears in a slight degree. But I believe that foxes never lick the hands of their masters, and I have been assured that when frightened they never tuck in their tails. If the explanation which I have given of the expression of affection in dogs be admitted, then it would appear that animals which have never been domesticated, namely wolves, jackals, and even foxes, have nevertheless acquired, through the principle of antithesis, certain expressive gestures. For it is not probable that these animals confined in cages should have learnt them by imitating dogs. Cats. I have already described the actions of a cat when feeling savage and not terrified. She assumes a crouching attitude and occasionally protrudes her forefeet, with the claws exerted ready for striking. The tail is extended, being curled or lashed from side to side. The hair is not erected, at least it was not so in the few cases observed by me. The ears are drawn closely backwards and the teeth are shown. Low, savage growls are uttered. We can understand why the attitude assumed by a cat when preparing to fight with another cat, or in any way greatly irritated, is so widely different from that of a dog approaching another dog with hostile intentions. For the cat uses her forefeet for striking, and this renders a crouching position convenient or necessary. She is also much more accustomed than a dog to lie concealed and suddenly spring on her prey. No cause can be assigned with certainty for the tail being lashed or curled from side to side. This habit is common to many other animals, for instance to the puma when prepared to spring. But it is not common to dogs or to foxes, as I infer from Mr. St. John's account of a fox lying in wait and seizing a hare. We have already seen that some kinds of lizards and various snakes, when excited, rapidly vibrate the tips of their tails. It would appear as if, under strong excitement, there existed an uncontrollable desire for movement of some kind, owing to nerve force being freely liberated from the excited sensorium, and that as the tail is left free, and as its movement does not disturb the general position of the body, it is curled or lashed about. All the movements of a cat when feeling affectionate are in complete antithesis to those just described. She now stands upright, with slightly arched back, tail perpendicularly raised, and ears erected, and she rubs her cheeks and flanks against her master or mistress. The desire to rub something is so strong in cats under this state of mind that they may often be seen rubbing themselves against the legs of chairs or tables or against doorposts. This manner of expressing affection probably originated through association, as in the case of dogs, from the mother nursing and fondling her young, and perhaps from the young themselves loving each other and playing together. Another and very different gesture, expressive of pleasure, has already been described, namely, the curious manner in which young and even old cats, when pleased, alternately protrude their forefeet with separated toes, as if pushing against and sucking their mother's teats. This habit is so far analogous to that of rubbing against something that both apparently are derived from actions performed during the nursing period. Why cats should show affection by rubbing so much more than do dogs, though the latter delight in contact with their masters, and why cats only occasionally lick the hands of their friends, whilst dogs always do so, I cannot say. Cats cleanse themselves by licking their own coats more regularly than do dogs. On the other hand, their tongues seem less well fitted for the work than the longer and more flexible tongues of dogs. Cats, when terrified, stand at full height, and arch their backs in a well-known and ridiculous fashion. They spit, hiss, or growl. The hair over the whole body, and especially on the tail, becomes erect. In the instances observed by me, the basal part of the tail was held upright, the terminal part being thrown on one side. But sometimes the tail is only a little raised, and is bent almost from the base to one side. The ears are drawn back, and the teeth exposed. When two kittens are playing together, the one often thus tries to frighten the other. From what we have seen in former chapters, all the above points of expression are intelligible, except the extreme arching of the back. I am inclined to believe that, in the same manner as many birds, whilst they ruffle their feathers, spread out their wings and tail to make themselves look as big as possible, so cats stand upright at their full height, arch their backs, often raise the basal part of the tail, and erect their hair for the same purpose. The lynx, when attacked, is said to arch its back, and is thus figured by Brehm. But the keepers in the zoological gardens have never seen any tendency to this action in the larger feline animals, such as tigers, lions, etc., and these have little cause to be afraid of any other animal. Cats use their voices much as a means of expression, and they utter, under various emotions and desires, at least 6 or 7 different sounds. The purr of satisfaction, which is made during both inspiration and expiration, is one of the most curious. The puma, cheetah, and ocelot likewise purr, but the tiger, when pleased, emits a peculiar short snuffle, accompanied by the closure of the eyelids. It is said that the lion, jaguar, and leopard do not purr. Horses. Horses, when savage, draw their ears closely back, protrude their heads, and partially uncover their incisor teeth, ready for biting. When inclined to kick behind, they generally, through habit, draw back their ears, and their eyes are turned backwards in a peculiar manner. When pleased, as when some coveted food is brought to them in the stable, they raise and draw in their heads, prick their ears, and look intently towards their friend, often whinny. Impatience is expressed by pawing the ground. The actions of a horse when much startled are highly expressive. One day my horse was much frightened at a drilling machine, covered by a tarpaulin, and lying on an open field. He raised his head so high that his neck became almost perpendicular, and this he did from habit, for the machine lay on a slope below, and could not have been seen with more distinctness through the raising of the head, nor, if any sound had proceeded from it, could the sound have been more distinctly heard. His eyes and ears were directed intently forwards, and I could feel through the saddle the palpitations of his heart. With red, dilated nostrils he snorted violently, and whirling round, would have dashed off at full speed had I not prevented him. The distension of the nostrils is not for the sake of scenting the source of danger, for when a horse smells carefully at any object and is not alarmed, he does not dilate his nostrils. Owing to the presence of a valve in the throat, A horse when panting does not breathe through his open mouth, but through his nostrils, and these consequently have become endowed with great powers of expansion. This expansion of the nostrils, as well as the snorting, and the palpitations of the heart, are actions which have become firmly associated during a long series of generations with the emotion of terror, for terror has habitually led the horse to the most violent exertion in dashing away at full speed from the cause of danger. End of Section 9.